Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists, who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know, these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. This episode features Jas Knight. Born in Hartford, Connecticut, his talent for drawing was recognized at an early age. He sold his first painting at age 7 and had his first one-man show at the age of 8. He went on to receive numerous awards and later went to study at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Jas currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Enjoy this episode featuring Jas Knight. Jas, welcome to my podcast. I appreciate the opportunity to feature you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Let's start with a simple question, which is, when did you discover your artistic passion?
I discovered it fairly early on as a child, while I was in, I guess you would call it grammar school or elementary school. Yeah, it would have been somewhere around when I was in kindergarten.
What inspired you? Did you see a painting or something that turned you on?
I wasn't inspired so much as sort of, I guess you could say, discovered on some level. One of my kindergarten teacher, she had noticed I was putting in certain details in the drawings I would do during the class assignments that were, I guess, abnormal enough for her to alert my parents to the fact that she thought I should get a little push in art because she noticed some artistic skill there, I guess.
How do you define your practice?
Well, wow, that's a pretty broad question. Well, I'm primarily a worker, so I do. It just so happens that the field of work is fine art, which some people value more or less depending on how they've been raised, I guess. But yeah, I'm essentially just a person who works. Yeah.
And has your technique changed over the years?
I would hope it's getting better. In the words of Art Tatum, if a man isn't getting better, he should quit. So I'm constantly trying to improve, for sure.
How did your art professors impact you?
The most valuable lesson I learned being in school from teachers was what not to do, basically. I don't want to be a person who's scared to take the risk of crashing and burning and go into the field of teaching because of that, just to make a solid living. And I feel like that was what a lot of people who I studied under at some point were. There were others, but I think many people who teach art just because they're trying to make a living more than trying to help artists attain the skills they need to make it as artists in the world. And I just knew that that's what I determined while I was in school. I wouldn't be one of those people when I got out of school.
At what point did you know you wanted to paint figures, portraits versus abstraction?
Bit of a bifurcation fallacy. And I say that because, and this is not me trying to give into some drivel about the abstract nature of figurative painting, but I do that sort of hard line and antithesis that people set up. I don't think of visual art that way. Because we're translating a three-dimensional world into one to be viewed two-dimensionally, that is us painters, there is abstraction is necessarily baked into the process.
Can you elaborate on that?
So that's why I said it's a bit of a bifurcation fallacy, or, it's like a false binary to think of art in those categories distinctively. I think of all art that's being presented two-dimensionally as abstraction, essentially, because we're trying to create the illusion of three dimensions on a two-dimensional surface, and we do it via and by the means of abstraction, of design and prioritizing and creating a certain kind of stratigraphy or hierarchy of value, etc. All of these things are tools that we use in an abstract way to communicate something that we feel is real about the world visually.
What is the role of drawing in your work?
Yeah, I believe that to paint is to draw. So I believe drawing is very important, and I believe drawing it's fundamental. It's the thing that my first teacher discovered that I was doing.
How do you keep learning?
Well, I guess we'll start with one should be reading. So learning a lot of times for me is tied to reading for sure. I read quite a bit, but also looking. To look is to learn often too. To look, I'll leave it there.
And what do you enjoy most about your practice?
I would say the end of a prolific workday, being able to look back on the workday and see the immediate results of a day's worth of work. So painting rewards the painter in that way, that you can see your work fairly immediately, whereas other fields, sometimes you don't see that, you're not rewarded in such a way as immediately.
Do you consider your work portraiture?
No, I don't. I do quite a bit of genre painting. I haven't done a lot of still lives, but I've done some, and I hope to do some landscape before long. I would hope that I'm not primarily just a portrait artist. Portraits, they are part of what I do, but they are hardly exhaustive. I mean, you could hardly categorize everything that I do as being portraiture. In a sense, anything can be a portrait too, though, right? Even a still life, in some sense.
What form of painting do you enjoy the most?
At this point, I'm enjoying genre painting quite a bit. Right now, I'm enjoying working on these genre scenes. But then again, anything, if you ask me as I'm painting a portrait, what do I would say I'm enjoying the portrait. Whatever I'm working on currently is probably the thing I'm enjoying the most.
And are you listening to music while you're working?
Not typically, unless it's forced upon me by a model. I typically try to avoid the distraction sometimes of the music, because music is amusing, but that amusement can sometimes lead to distraction. And so I try to focus a lot of times.
What's your process on deciding color?
Color is a very complex thing, and of course I have the way I set up a palette, which I think is very important, having a system of sorts and understanding the way colors, basically the science of the way colors work together, because I rely so heavily on perception for my color mixtures. It's usually dictated to me by the thing that I'm perceiving, the thing I'm looking at, so much of it is determined. And now, of course, the science, that being the things that I've studied about color and the relationships of colors to other colors, that ends up having a certain kind of logic to it after I take in the scene and the way I work it out on my palette. But yeah, it's largely dictated to me by the subject, is what I'm saying. Of course, then, that's a simplification though too, because then there are elements of subordination of color to bring out other. So, there is a subjective element also.
When do you know work is finished?
This sounds really arty, the unfinished nature of all paintings and that kind of thing, which, when it's pulled from me by a patron that where they're like, I need to get this as is, please, don't touch it anymore. That kind of thing obviously can end a painting. Obviously, a deadline, if I'm doing a portrait commission, I have to get it finished by the portrait commission deadline, and it's necessarily finished then. But if you're talking in a broader sense, and when I'm working on my own work and this is something that has no immediate deadline, those kinds of things can go on for quite a while. And I probably have placed things in my studio now that have been there for years and they're not finished, so to speak.
When in your career did you decide to accept commissions?
I accepted my first commission while I was in high school, so I technically was still a child. Who was my music teacher at the time, and she commissioned me to do a painting. It was actually my first oil painting. I was in high school. I can't remember what grade I was in, but I remember that being my first commission. It was an oil painting from a teacher.
As you've evolved, did your feelings change at all or waver at all about commissioned work?
Yeah. the profession that is of creating art, whether I'm speaking primarily of two-dimensional art, portraiture and paintings and, oil paintings, or let's say, just say oil paintings, for instance. For the longest, this was not a celebrated profession. And the primary, it was a public facing profession too. So your art was for a public to be consumed. And so the idea that the kind of thing that is really prevalent nowadays where, the higher the artist is exalted, the less they are, less of an affinity or they have for, or penchant they have for commission work and that kind of thing, and doing it at the beckoning of a patron or whatever, So this kind of thing is, in other words, is not as pure an expression of art as the emanation of an artist solely coming from, their minds and their imagination. These weren't two categories that people saw as competing in the past. And I think that the idea is a product of where we are at right now, obviously, as a culture. So then the more obscure, the more of an obscurantist the artist is, often the greater the artist is seen to be. And I guess I'm not doing a good job because I'm not answering questions all that well right now. So I'm probably filling out the stereotype quite well. But yeah, there is a sense in which there's an elevation of work that's non-commissioned over work that's like I say, the emanation of an artist's imagination or from their mind. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the idea that I just think this almost like a bogus sort of distinction. I think that many great works in the past were resultant from commissions that the artists had to do them. I feel like it is the artist's duty to communicate effectively through their given medium to an audience. And so I don't know if this quite answers that question, but I do feel like the way a lot of artists approach the idea of commission, it speaks a lot to the idea that the artist should just be free. They could put a thing in front of people, and the more unintelligible it is, the more of a public good it is. And I would hope my work doesn't fall into that category. So although I don't primarily do commissions, I don't have a particular problem with them, if that makes sense. If they come in the right form.
So in general, do you think about your audience while you're working?
No, I don't. So that might seem antithetical to what I was just saying. I don't unless I have to. There's a sense in which I am part of the audience. I've said this before. The more I'm able to dig into my own individual outlook, because I share a humanity with 8 billion people on the planet, it's going to necessarily probably resonate with someone else too, because, I'd imagine there's anything terrifically unique about me, in that sense.
When do the titles enter the creative process?
I've done away with the need for titling by just choosing to categorize my work with numbers and musical titles. So I'll say this is Fugue number 8 or 9 or Fugue number 20. And I have a notebook at the studio where I have the previous Fugue titles or prelude titles, etc. These are for the croquis and esquisse, like these studies that I do. I'll just write down a number for each one of them and then just kind of I think it was Gerhard Richter who kind of took the idea of just numbering your paintings away from me. He's already done that. I guess I could have done that. But I like the idea of giving them musical titles because I like the idea that music is presented in such a way where you don't have to have a narrative or a storyline, even if the artist who's making the music has a narrative or some emotion in mind. They can just title a thing a fugue, and then you appreciate it almost in a very abstract way as a work of art, and without having to superimpose on it some other kind of ideology, or if that makes any sense.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
I think one would have to presuppose that there is a definition to even ask that, because the phrase is used in the question. There's a sense in which I am a Black artist in the sense that I am what people would call phenotypically presenting Black, right? And then I do art. So therefore, we can put those two together. But I don't see any real benefit to calling what I do Black art. Even if others find that to be beneficial, I don't really see it to be terrifically beneficial. I would say I'm pretty averse to calling what I do black art.
Share with us, what are you excited about right now?
The artist's life, I have found that having a ballast in it and a certain kind of consistency is more important to me than what they would say, like the turbulences of the things that people typically focus on. They think of an artist as being this person who's cast about by his or her passions. And I typically gravitate toward, I try to just be consistent. In other words, have a schedule, show up, do the work. So the excitement happens while I'm doing the work, but I try to not make it a thing about the peaks and valleys, because that isn't coherent with being consistent usually. So, and consistency is really important for an artist if you're going to develop.
What do you feel is the purpose of art?
I don't know that I can answer that question. I mean, this is now we're in the realm of a telos here. And I think there are so many things that have to be presupposed in order to categorize art that way. I would have to assume, and I guess you say, well, just speak about what you think the purpose is. And it's like, well, if I had to try to conjure up a purpose in this very moment, I'm left with a blank stare from my own self. I can't possibly do that. But if anything, I would say that, like I said earlier, that art is to be public facing. So if no one had eyes, no one would make visual art. Primarily, its purpose is fulfilled when people, obviously each artist has to dictate what their goals are. If I'm doing visual art, then I need to make sure that the visuals matter. And I think that is something, that's something, well, I've arrived there. That's just something that a lot of people aren't terrifically convinced of these days. It seems that the primary goal of visual art is visuals. And I would say, as a visual artist, the visuals they should have a certain kind of supremacy and a hierarchy.
If you weren't a visual artist, what other career path do you think you would have chosen?
There is no answer for that. You say, well, if you weren't a phenotypically black presenting person, what kind of other race would you want to be? I mean, I can't make anything out of that, really. This is who I am, I guess if you listen to scientists, there are other universes out there, I guess, where there are some other versions of myself, but as far as the Jas I know, this is the only version of him that exists.
Do you work primarily with oil?
Yes. At the time being, it's usually oil or charcoals.
And do you ever sculpt? Are you a sculptor?
I did some when I was in school. I guess I had a sort of knack for it. At least that's what my teacher told me. But I'm far too fastidious to sculpt. I can't have clay and all kinds of stuff all over me all day. No, I can't do that. It doesn't fit my temperament too much. But I enjoy sculpture quite a bit.
So what does your workplace look and feel like?
It's very clean and it's very organized at the end of every day, because the paint, as I used to say when I was in school, belongs on a canvas, not on me or anything else. And that's indeed where I try to put the paint, on the canvas.
I've enjoyed this conversation very much. This is going to be our last question. As an artist, how do you want your work to influence the way people think?
If I've made people angry or happy, if I've made them feel something from the work, I will have achieved my goal, because visual art, two-dimensional or oil painting, is probably one of the most underwhelming mediums to work in as an artist at this point. The world is fascinated with musical artists. They're fascinated with cinema. They're fascinated with even short form content creation. They're fascinated with so many things. And it's very hard to get people to stop and spend time looking at a still image of anything at this point. So if in the 21st century, the year 2025, I'm able to captivate an audience, even if it's an audience of one, and this person spends the time and actually is able to be enraged or made to feel happy, I will have accomplished a great feat if I've gotten them to not only stop and not be able to swipe up or scroll and just feel something in front of the painting. I feel like it's quite a low bar, but existing in a world with so many competing forms of media, I find that the medium of oil paint is probably not one of the ones that is the most influential at this point in time in history. To make people feel anything in front of the painting is an accomplishment. And I wouldn't begin to try to dictate what they should feel or for me to feel like I've accomplished. If I've gotten you to feel anything, I've done something quite remarkable, because it's really hard to keep a person on a video. If they made it this far in the interview, I feel like I've accomplished something. They haven't such a social bore here, Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.